The kept place. I came to Sable Ridge for the kind of work no one notices unless it isn't done. The water district sat at the end of a gravel access road behind the grocery and the small hardware store that always smelled faintly of feed, even if the sacks were kept in the back. Our office was a long room with painted cinder block walls, a humming row of mismatched refrigerators donated over the years by people who thought we'd have use for them, and a pegboard where the shuttered cameras for tank sites hung from hooks labeled with fading marker. The fluorescent tubes buzzed at their own temper, a little brighter when the compressor kicked on in the lab and the pump room opened to let out a wet cement smell. On my first morning, I rinsed the coffee mug I'd picked up from a second-hand shop. White with a chipped rim, a sun faded on one side with a face too friendly, and the house hose in the back bay whistled where the gasket didn't T-seal. I let the stream run over my thumb until the grease lifted, then shut it halfway so the whistle softened to a breath. Water here tasted like wet pennies for the first half-second and then went flat. I learned to pour it and let it sit. I learned that the fridge door with the cracked seal had two settings, warm and colder than the back of a cave. We kept our shift schedule taped to the wall with green painter's tape. The board said when you were responsible for South Tank, or for meter reads in the industrial park, or for chlorine checks. It also gave you your turn at the Saturday night duty, the kind where you might have to drive up to the Forest Day Use gate because an alarm went off at the booster and a light blinked and then the light stopped, and all that meant the same thing. Get in the truck, let the seatbelt rope burn your shoulder, take the road that narrowed, do not enjoy it, do not fear it, do not think about it much at all. I slept in a one-bedroom over a closed bakery. The cooler downstairs kept a low, even hum all night, and the stairwell smelled like flour that would never again touch a hand. The refrigerator in my apartment had a soft rattle at certain speeds. I could tell what hour it was by where the rattle became a small vibration in the cupboard and made the plates ring. If I put my palm against the wall by my bed after 2 in the morning, sometimes I felt the compressor cycle. It had the rhythm of breath. We were 5 people at the district. Reeve was the manager, the kind of man who wrote things down and then kept writing to make the letters even when he had nothing else to say. Lenore had the best mind for schematics, all of it in her head like a map that kept shading itself in. Pax did the lab tests and complained the least. Hattie never raised her voice and could lift a tank hatch alone and lower it gently, as if she put lids back on every glass in the world. I had been there 2 months and was well liked because I did not talk much and I said yes to what was asked. Sable Ridge had its name without the ridge and mostly without the sable. People said there were summer martins once, but they used to say things. The town made its thin living on a packaging plant, a seasonal cannery, and the kind of tourism that didn't announce itself. People came quietly with their boots and left quietly with them muddier. They parked by the old hostelry and went into Thornroot Reserve with its warning boards and its paths that the rangers pretended not to mow. The reserve started on the other side of a chain-link fence at the far end of our yard. There was a gate there with a lock we never used. If you were tall enough or determined, you could step over. A drainage channel ran along the fence, concrete poured in a shallow V with a stain down the center where something iron had seeped and taught the moss a darker green. I'd like to stand there on my smoke breaks and watch the channel carry a trickle of water that made a sound like a zipper when it hit the grate. I do not smoke, but at the district everyone takes smoke breaks. It is the regularity the lungs love, not the cigarette. We used barcode scanners for the meters, little plastic guns with red tongues of light that blinked and beeped when they read the code on the lid. Nothing melodious. A flat chirp that came to your ears a fraction too late, like an insult you didn't deserve. You put the gun back in its cradle, and the tiny screen would jump with the numbers, and sometimes miss a number, and sometimes add it twice, and then you wrote your initials in the box on the sheet, because initialing made it real, made the little beep mean something to a person not standing in a yard, with a dog behind a window watching you and not making a sound. An ordinary day began with keys. The board, the ring, the feel of a dull tooth under your thumb. You ran the loop to the first site, the South Tank, which had been built when the town believed in itself and painted with a logo no one liked. You checked the chain on the hatch and read the data off the panel and wrote it down, though the data was sent off by itself to someone who cared about it more than you did. You listened to the fans. You looked at the chlorine bottle through the little window and rolled your shoulders at the way the chilled air in the room had a taste that was not taste more like the sensation of your tongue losing a language. After South Tank, you took the road by the cannery. The cannery blew steam. It made the sound of a person counting indoors. The forklifts beeped when they reversed, and the beeps came up and bounced off the metal cladding and came back at you a fraction out of time with the beeps that were actually happening. Past that, the road sloped and narrowed and the trees got close, and you found yourself driving slower without deciding to, hands tight on the wheel so you could feel the ruts. If you took the left by the rusted silo, you reached the booster pump station that fed the eastern spur, and the line that ran under the fence, and the reserve, the line with the small leak we were supposed to find. The leak was a non-catastrophic loss, in the way a bruise is not an injury if you can cover it with a sleeve. The telemetry made a jag, a few gallons at odd hours, nothing that triggered a scream from the board, something you saw and then didn't see when the graph was greased by the next hour. Reeve put the work order on the peg and said my name without looking up. "Take a good look," he said. "Not the road, the ground." I could have said the ground is the entire road. Instead, I nodded and picked up the meter gun and the stick with a hook on it for lifting lids, and I took Hattie's good flashlight, even though the day would be bright. On my way out, I touched the fridge seal. The magnet had bowed away so the strip didn't lie flush. My fingers came back a little wet, as if the fridge had breathed on them. I wiped them on my jeans and smelled metal and something faintly green, like you smelled when you turned an old tap that hadn't been moved since someone moved away. The reserve begins with birch, because that is what the road wants to look at. White, a smattering of leaves like coins that someone rubbed and set down. Then the birch give up without a fight, and the spruce carry the shade further than it means to go. The path to the booster station was proper only for the first half mile. The county had put down crushed rock once and then spent every year since pretending it hadn't. The potholes filled with water and then emptied, and the edges crumbled like cake. A crow followed my truck and did not say anything. In the little laybys the Forest Service used to use for their trucks, there were beer cans the color of clouds. Everything you leave in a forest turns the color of the weather. I parked where the wheels would not sink when I wanted to pull out again. You do not want to get your truck stuck when you are alone, even if you tell yourself you could walk out. And you tell yourself you know all the bends, and your mouth knows the names of the trees, even if you never said them out loud. The booster station was a concrete box with a door that stuck at the hinge. When I opened it the first time a few weeks back, a dead moth had fallen from the lintel and made a soft sound on my boot that made me think of paper being folded carefully. The station's panel blinked in a rhythm someone else had decided on, each light with a small label in a kind of handwriting no one's hand had made. I walked the line. You can't really see a line. You see where the ground was once cut and filled, and the scar that never grows hair quite like the rest. You see the way the ferns are less bold. You see the way the moss is smoother in one ribbon that runs and refuses to be interrupted by a stump. I took the stick and poked at the ground here and there. I listened for a whisper of water where there should be no sound. A leak will sometimes tell you. It has that zipper sound, like the drain at our fence but softer. And it comes and goes when a cloud moves over the sun and the ground does what you would not have thought it did. When I cut off the hard-packed road and moved among the trees by the old culvert, the air changed. I felt it first as a coolness on my cheeks. A draught pushed out of the slope, steady and without smell, not the kind morning makes when the sun tries its hand on the night's work. I followed it to a place where a root lay on the surface, like the back of a very long, very patient animal. The root forked and made a small frame around a patch of soil that was pale and almost smooth. There was no moss inside that frame, no needle litter, just a scuff that might have been made by claws or boots. It was the ordinary scuff that seemed like something else. You know the sort, how the cup simply sits on the table and yet your hand goes to move it because it appears to be an inch closer than it should be, how your towel is stiff in the morning in a way that suggests it held itself upright for a time in the night. I stood with the stick hooked over my shoulder and watched that pale soil as if I were watching a window pane from inside and expected a bird to strike it. Nothing struck. The wind stayed the same. There was a tune inside the trees that was not a tune. Leaves have their own words. Needles choose sibilants and birch brushes at F, and the grass whispers nonsense when you pull your palms along it. This was no word. It was a sound that pretended to have a source. The sort of sound you turn your face toward and listen to, like you might listen to a person in another room telling a story to someone else. The sort of sound that makes your name sit up in your throat. I lifted the stick and pressed the hook into the pale soil. It did not give at once. A crust had formed, thin as a crust your thumb can break at breakfast when the butter spreads across the toast unevenly. The hook went through. Sand? The soil shifted under, not far, and something hollow below it answered in a way my bones felt before my ears did. I stepped back and the zipper sound came and went. I told myself it was water. That was part true. There was always water. We are always moving it, and we say we provide it and we carry it, and we like to forget that it was here before us and will outlast us, and that it does what it wants inside the ways we make for it to go. By the time I walked back to the booster station door, I did not remember crossing one particular patch of ground, and that bothered me because my boot had found a depression I would have noticed. The door stuck and then let go. The panel lights breathed. I wrote down a number I had not read because writing numbers made it feel like I was doing what I had been sent to do. Back at the office, the printer had curled its paper. It did that when the humidity rose. Our hose had dripped in the bay, and the water ran in a nerve-thin line down to the drain in a way I did not like. The scanner gun used for inventory had been moved from its cradle, and someone had set it on the edge of the table so that its cord went taut. I pushed it back into place and it chirped once, the sound of a thing that was satisfied too easily. Reeve asked if the line needed a dig. I shook my head. He looked at me until he had to blink. "We'll wait," he said. "See what the telemetry does." It did nothing for the rest of the day, and I told myself that meant it was nothing. The fridge breathed, the compressor kicked on, the fluorescent hummed, and a moth battered itself at plastic that promised sky and did not deliver. That night, at my apartment, the hall light sensor clicked and then did not come on. I hit the switch by habit and it did nothing. I was already at the top of the stairs. The stairwell showed its writing on the wall, where things had been taped and removed over years. The cool from the bakery cooler pushed up not as a scent exactly, but a presence that made your wrist hair want to flatten. I unlocked my door. The refrigerator in my place was the loudest thing alive. It made itself known when I stood with the mug and let the tap run. I kept the water on for an extra minute until it stopped smelling like pipe and began to seem like itself. I put the mug to my mouth and the water was fine. I put the mug down on the small counter and its rim left a ring on the formica. The ring shone for a moment, and instead of slowing like a clock, it moved slightly, like a thing under glass deciding not to be seen. I went to bed. I lay on the side that faced the wall because that made me feel like I was setting my back to something that would hold. When the cool from the fridge pushed its repaired breath into the room, the movement made my pillow feel as if someone had very gently taken 2 fingers to the pillow corner and tugged, then placed it back exactly where it had been before, meaning in the morning I would assume the indentation was something I had made myself and not something that had been made for me. The shift schedule said I had the early tank checks and a meter route east. I woke before the alarm. The green numbers on the microwave were wrong, and then right again. I took a towel that had been washed too often and found that its board-like stiffness was worse at the edges. I wet it, and it softened, and when I wrung it, the water ran off in a flat plane for a second before gravity remembered itself. When I opened the district's door, the compressor clicked in the lab as if it had been waiting for me to make the first move. Pax nodded from the bench with the rows of sample bottles and an open document protector where he slid the day's printout. The little zipper bag made a faint cling when it touched the console. He was measuring free chlorine. He liked to do it by the window. He liked the pale yellow his eye knew before the meter told him. We had one radio. It lived on the shelf and sounded like rain when you moved the antenna. You had to lean into it to be sure you weren't hearing your own palm over your ear. Reeve had written down the work order for my meter route and paper-clipped 3 maps on cheap paper. He always printed maps because he did not believe in memories the way the phones pretended to. He once said, staring into the air near my shoulder, that phones gave up at the worst possible time, and paper at least dies the same way every time. The scanner read the codes as if the codes had been written in a language it recognized just enough to hate. In the little grass rectangles on streets with names that pretended to be wild, Deer Path, Fur Lane names given when the surveyor still believed the bear might come down and carry a trash bag away. I knelt and popped lids and leaned with the gun until the beep came and the screen pushed out numbers. 3 times before noon, the numbers blinked as if a password had been entered and then returned to the correct display with a pale, flat face. Once it printed a receipt in the office for the end-of-day reconciliation before I was back to feed it the paper, and the paper hung from the printer as if it were panting. I tore the strip along its teeth, and the cut was not clean, and I set it on Reeves' desk and stepped back to wash my hands for no reason. In the afternoon, the county posted advisories. That is how people begin to move differently in a place that thinks every day is the same until the road slides and the creek goes grey. The message said a portion of Thornroot Reserve had been closed for resource conservation and trail repair after windthrow. It used the words hazard and assessment. Someone had printed it and taped it to a park message board with a thumb that had taken on the scent of the blue painter Ayres tape. On our side of the fence, Lenore put a copy beside the schedule as if you could route around a forest. She wrote the date in the corner with a thin pen, and the numbers looked like tall bread loaves. Reeve nodded. Then for the rest of the hour he wrote nothing. The eastern spur runs under that, Pax said. We won't touch the right of way, Reeve said. We'll push chlorine on the other side. There are kinds of pressure. Water knows them by oblique names. It tenses when the governor wants to save electricity in the night. It slows when air finds a way into the main from the new build on Quarry Street. It bleeds where a joint whose bolts turned the day your father was born looks like itself until it does not. There are other kinds of pressure only people feel, the kind that lifts your shoulders into your ears without your permission, the kind that makes the zipper sound from the drain feel like a request stated in a friend's slow voice, the kind that makes writing your initials in the box take longer than the box deserves. That night, after a simple dinner of whatever the small grocer had left at closing, I lay on the sofa and listened to the trucks on the highway. They were far enough that their sound arrived as a breath beneath the bakery, cooler, and the fans through my wall and the fridge's collections of soft, steady dyings. It is odd how quickly one hum can begin to carry another, how 2 threads can twine and make a tone you consider alone. The tone in my apartment made the air seem thicker I got up and opened the window, and the late spring had its own smell that could have been called loam if you had the patience for words that try too hard. It was a dark smell, weighted, wet at the bottom. When you live alone and you do not talk much, time makes its own ways to speak to you. The microwave blinking the hour and then correcting itself. The receipt roll curling in its tray. The towel's stiffness telling you the line was less good than it once was. I slept. I dreamed of a soil like a sheet on a bed, and my thumb pressing through the crisp top, and the hollow below answering, not a word, but a syllable without a language to belong to. Reeve sent me back to the booster 2 days later, after telemetry showed a little sag in pressure that the town did not feel in their taps yet. He had the kind of quiet worry that looks like patience from across a room. He pressed his thumb to the paper near the line that represented the eastern spur and left a grey half-moon. "Walk it," he said, "but stay clear of the closure." The closure was a ribbon on a gate, a notice stapled beneath it that had been written for someone who would never read it. The reserve contained the closed area by marking it and then forgetting it. A light rain came on. The road took the rain and was the sort not to give it back to the air anytime soon. There is a tiredness in wet earth that is not sorrow, but is near sorrow if you are the kind of person who thinks this way. I took the stick and the good flashlight, though it was morning. I wore the jacket with the district name stitched above the breast in thread that had darkened with the oil from other men's shirts over years. Near the culvert, the air shifted again, left to right. The draft had no smell, but my mouth made one a taste at the back of the tongue that reminded me of the old iron sink in my grandmother's house iron that had acquired a patina you could not scrub off and would not dare try. The pale soil inside the frame of root had been disturbed. A hare had stepped there or something with claws that only hooked at the end. A small sink had formed. It looked like the point where the toe of a boot presses once and then does not go back to the same place. I crouched and pushed the hook into that. The crust went. The stick sang against a thin, hard edge. Stone? I thought so. In that way you think a thing, because you want it to be ordinary. I moved soil back with my hand, and it was light enough to do that, not so heavy as it should be when wet. I scraped and found not stone, but a board edge, grey like bone. When I reached it with my fingertip, there was temperature, not cold exactly, but the kind you feel when your skin wants to be careful. I brushed and found a line in the board, a seam. Then, at the seam, something like a nail head, made of darker wood or darker iron, or neither. I do not know why I did not stop. No one stops at the right time. I have a sense that you reading this in your head are telling me now that I should have walked back to the truck and closed the door and called Reeve and said I think that our line was buried shallow in some work that predates records. But I can only tell you what I did. I exercised the small privilege of my solitude. I pushed my thumb at the seam. The board flexed without wanting to flex, and the seam opened. Soil poured in like sugar, then stopped. The draft became direction and went past my face and down. In the pause that came after, I felt the trees around me get their weight better, settle their feet. The zipper sound arrived very softly, as if the drain at the fence gate had come inside my chest and someone there was pulling it open a hair. The whispers were not words. They were not intention. The sound had the shape of meaning, and my mind did its old trick and reached for a word to hold it. A person alone in a forest will make the forest a person. I am not proud of this. I do not think it makes me special. The sound had that small upturn at the end, like a question anyway. I say that not to be poetic. I say it because my breath shortened to answer. When my hand found the nail head again, it was not iron. It gave as my fingernail pushed and came away like a cap of something that had grown and then died there. I used the hook and caught the underlip of the board. 2 inches rose. The seam widened and soil went in quick, and the zipper sound turned and became a breath drawn through the smallest opening a mouth can make. In the small window of darkness beneath the board, I saw something I took for a root. Only the root had not the blunt end a cut root has, nor the bristle of fine fibers where it seeks a way deeper. It was pale, like sap becomes on the air. It was articulated in a way that spoke of joints rather than growth. It lay still. My eyes fooled me into thinking it moved, because I had moved. Then it did move in a slow, grave way, a way that anticipated weight rather than sought it. I set the board back, the way you do with a box you later pretend you never opened. The seam closed almost. My hand shook. Not the way an old man's hand shakes. The way a person's hand shakes when they have come near to a thing their grandfather would not have told stories about at a table because he reserved speech for the sort of weather that did not endanger a roof. I stood, and the draft slowed, then reversed, moving up and around me as if it counted my ribs on the way. The zipper sound went away. The forest made itself again. A truck on the highway hummed for a few seconds, and then did not. I brushed my hands together, and the wet soil kept to itself, clinging to my palms as if it had somewhere else to be. I wiped my hands on my jeans and left rust-colored streaks. The rest of the day did not touch me. That is the best description. Hattie spoke to me in the pump room, and I answered. I do not remember what was said. Pax set down a Bunsen burner that had been lit for a boil test and asked if I smelled gas. He shook his head when he realized none was lit. A delivery came, chlorine tanks, and the driver wrote on a form with a stub of pencil and left a black crescent where his nail had pressed the paper through to the wood beneath. Powers flashed once in the light over the sink, and we all looked up as if that S where power would be. The fridge door at the end of the line refused to close, and I pushed it, and it pushed me. And the seal made that kiss sound that is not affectionate at all, but only two bits of plastic trying to make themselves align. That night, I did not dream. It is worse, I think, when sleep gives you nothing, because then the things you did not dream hang in the air around the bed and sit on the chair you set your shirt over and hover by the window you meant to close and did not. I woke at the nearest part of morning and stood in the small kitchen and drank a glass of the flat water, and the fridge hum, which usually stayed around itself, reached around me and gave me the unwholesome feeling of being noticed. I tried to file a note for Reeve the next morning, and the pen did not want to leave ink at first. It stuttered. The paper, already curled from the humidity, rose to meet it and made a whisper when the nib found a smooth line. I wrote, investigate board possible abandoned structure. I did not write what I had felt in the air. I did not write the pale thing that looked like a root, and then did not. I did not write the word bone, because that word did not seem to belong to the person I was at the district, whose job was to put numbers in boxes and smooth other people, water with other people, chemicals. Lenore touched the paper at the place where I had written board. She ran a line with her nail under the word, a cartographer shading a new margin. There are old logging pockets all through there, she said. You might have found a brace. I liked her for saying that. The mind loves the sound of someone else giving it a reason. It sits down in the chair you provide. It puts its hands on the table and folds them. It says, yes, that is good. Now bring me the simple map. I did not go to the reserve that day. The advisory had changed its language, tightened it. The closure expanded from a loop trail to the whole east half of the reserve. The sign used an older symbol, a black circle with a bar that means no in any country where a person sees it and knows the hand that made it meant to stay. The advisory cited soil destabilization and hazard trees. A notice below it said that the county would bring equipment to the forebay and that all utility vehicles would stay off the road. Reeve looked at me for longer than a minute and then said we'd work through the weekend and shut the east spur if the pressure drops didn't resolve. He did not say my name this time. At the district, the sample fridge went off and back on, and the yellow edge around the sample bottles looked deeper, as if the plastic were older than it was. The fan on the microscope made a whine it had never made, and then it stopped forever, like a dog that barks at the mailman every day until the last day it does not. The scanner gun beeped 3 times in quick succession while no one touched it, and when I went to see, the readout said error 87 and then cleared to the home screen on its own, as if embarrassed. At noon, the cannery shut for the afternoon because a compressor had thrown a belt. People lingered in the parking lot, not in groups exactly, but in the small knots men make when they have to pretend the problem will resolve and they are waiting for the person with the answer to speak. The beeps of reversing forklifts did not sound. The trucks were gone. The steam drifted and then did not, as if the weather had become an idea. I ate a sandwich made with grocery bread and grocery meat and the kind of mustard that makes you think of funerals because it is set out near cold ham. I drank water from the office tap and felt it on my teeth. I did not want to write what it tasted like because naming a thing makes it worse. I dried my mug with a towel we kept on the hook by the sink, and the towel had dried to the shape of a hand in the night, and held that shape until my hand went in and made it ordinary. Pax's test results showed residual chlorine dipping for a half hour around 2 in the morning. It did that sometimes when valves did their small cough in the dark and someone who did not know thought a thief was washing his car. Though there are no thieves who wash their cars near the water district at 2 in the morning, and if there are, they do not keep a regular schedule. At the bottom of the page, a pale grey line had formed, like an old ghost of numbers. Pax raised his eyebrows and then lowered them again, not as if in surprise, but as if the news had sat down in a chair it liked. I left early. Reeve did not comment. I walked out without saying a thing. The back bay hose had been left running at a thread, and the thread made an almost invisible line that shook when the compressor kicked on. I turned the nozzle, and the whistle became a tone my ear felt like a tickle. At my apartment, the stairwell light worked again. It came on with a brief flutter that made me think of laughter cut short in another room, then settled. I put my hand on the rail, and the wood was warmer than it should have been. My door opened. I could tell no one had been there because I had placed a small coin on top of the door casing as a boy once showed me. The coin hadn't moved. It lay in dust, and the dust ring made a bright crescent where my finger had earlier drawn a circle. It rained around dusk, and the rain kept a steady sound. Outside, the streetlight across from my building went from yellow to a harsher white. Between the 2 temperatures of light, there was a span of time that made all the edges in the scene soften a little and then crisp. I sat on the sofa with the TV on mute to have another moving light in the room. I had the habit of keeping a receipt under my glass so I wouldn't make more rings on the table. The top receipt was for hose washers from the hardware and had a handwritten price because the barcode never took. I watched the ring of water grow darker, then pale, then dark again. The ring followed a slow pulse that matched my breath until it did not. Somewhere below, the bakery cooler cycled off with a click. The silence came up the stair and laid itself across the floor like a blanket. The fridge in my unit took advantage. It leaned into the room. The hum shifted until it felt like it was coming from within my chest, and I put my hand there and laughed once at myself and pressed, and the pressure I made answered in a way I do not want to describe at length. Because the answer had the shape of someone's palm answering mine from the other side of a thin door. I did not go to the reserve the next day. I did not go anywhere. I found reasons to stay in the office. I took the old handbook down and pretended the troubleshooting chart mattered to me. I changed a light tube that didn't need changing because a black fly had gotten itself trapped inside the plastic and rode the warm air around and around, and I could not stand to watch it work its circle. Hattie came in from the pump room and set a hand on my shoulder and did not ask the question she could have asked. "Storm tomorrow," she said. "Tie down the lids." She said storm the way someone says appointment, not fond of the word, but it has its place in the day. I tie down lids when rain wants to push itself into places we want it not to go. I took the kit with the straps and drove to the south tank and then the east turnout, where the plastic meter lids like to flip when the ditch ran. I tightened the strap on one lid and the ratchet made its sound, that clack-clack you can hear from a field away. I looked up at the sky, where the storm shoulder was already leaning on the mountains. I do not remember deciding to go to the booster. I was there. The truck idling, the door heavy, the panel lights impatient. I was not supposed to be there. The closure made me think of patrol cars and men who would turn their radios down to yell. Yet I wanted to run my hand over the grey board and find it did not give, and that the whisper was only the pressure in my head, and that the pale thing had been illness or fatigue, or a trick my brain had made as it found its angle in a place that takes and keeps angles not given lightly. The board did not look disturbed. Of course it didn't. A person likes to see their work undone when they want to tell the truth to someone else. It is so much easier to say, "Look what someone did here," than to say, "I did a thing, and then I tried to hide the thing, and here we are." There was the pale soil, and the two rootbacks, and the small frame made by both as if two hands had once made a cradle. I crouched, and the draft met me, and this time it had a smell. It was not rot. It was not soil, the way garden soil has a warm life to it. It was the in-between smell, the smell of old wood in a crawl space that never makes it to the light, the smell of time stored the way cloth stores scent in the pockets you forget to turn out. I put my hands to the board. I have no excuse. I did not even tell myself I was looking for a leak. I told myself I was looking for a thing I had felt so I could feel it again and say, that is all it was. I felt it and now I do not. I pressed and the board moved its fraction. I lifted. The seam opened and soil fell and the draft became stronger. The whispered sound found my left ear first, then my right, as if hands were cupped and voices put to them. The darkness below did not look like darkness of earth. It looked like darkness made and held. In that darkness was an edge. Something thin and pale lay where the soil dropped, and where the air moved, the thing moved. And then it did not. A joint flexed, 8 segments, 10, I do not know. It was a hand in the old sense that any part that grasps can be called a hand. It did not seek the light. It did not do anything at all that would prove to anyone who wanted proof that what I saw had the name I'm trying not to use. It lifted in air and made the shape of death, as it had been illustrated for the kind of children who are told to be good by people who do not believe in heaven or hell, but believe in the power of drawings. I dropped the board. It clapped the sound of something put back a moment too late. I stood. The draft continued and braided around my knees. The forest did not change for several seconds, then it changed all at once. I could hear the pressure differentials moving between trunks. I could hear the branches creak in the absence of wind. A crow further off made the sound crows make when they are not speaking to us, a low, gravelly purl that makes you feel like you are eavesdropping on a prayer. I stepped back, and my heel found a depression I had not made. My ankle turned, and I caught myself with my hands, and soil was on my tongue. It was not clean. There is a grain to certain dirt that suggests metal, as if tiny filings were mixed in. It is not that you taste iron the way you do when you bite your lip. It is that your tongue believes something that is not taste. I spat. My saliva was darker for a second. I wiped my mouth and then rubbed the back of my hand on the moss, and did not like the way the moss didn't want to take the stain. I stood and realized I was no longer sure which way the truck was. There are times when a place you know rejects you by way of kindness. It wipes your tracks and makes you stand where you are and ask forgiveness for something whose name you would not recognize if you heard it in a dream. I turned my head slowly, trying not to let the movement alert the part of me that wanted to run. Running is an error in a lot of situations. It alarms the thing that would not have noticed you if you had kept your arms at your sides. I breathed slowly through my mouth. The whispering sound rose and fell, as if breath were being measured elsewhere and metered through some duct that had been left in the world when the men who built the first water lines here decided they needed to put something somewhere, even if they did not understand it. I found the truck because the truck wore its color like a signal, a municipal white, invoking all the ordinances. My hand shook when I turned the key. The engine hesitated and then took its duty joylessly. When I put the truck in gear, something in the trees stirred. The movement was a pattern more than a thing. A grouping of branches that had not been grouped a moment before held themselves in an arrangement that suggested a rib cage. The cleft where two trunks met and had grown together the way old couples grow together looked like a pelvis. Farther in, a fallen tree lay with its broken end toward me like a shoulder. You know those illusions where you train your eyes to see a young woman and then an old woman? It was that. Only my eyes locked in and would not unlock. Back at the office, I washed my hands for too long, and the water became hot in the pipes and the smell lifted off the steam. The hose in the back bay kept up its whistle, and someone must have tried to fix it because the whistle now had a second tone, and the two made a chord that I did not think was possible with one hose. I put my mug under the tap when the whistle stopped and filled it and brought it to my mouth, and the water touched my lip, and all the small nerves there told me something that was not language. I set the mug down and looked at my face in the black of the microwave door and saw that I looked like I'd been told something serious. Reeve stood by the schedule. He tapped a pencil at the blank square where Monday had been, and the green tape had curled and the corner lifted. "We have to shut the east spur," he said, "before the storm." He looked toward the door, as if the act of saying the thing obligated a wind to arrive and do what it does to words. I knew he wanted me to offer. I knew that I would. He did not want to make it an order because then it would be the district doing it and not me going willingly into the small weather that lives under the larger. I nodded. Lenore raised one eyebrow and then looked back at the folded map. "Take a radio," Reeve said, and stopped, as if there was something else he would say if he believed in the sort of world in which saying it would help. I pulled on the jacket with the stitched name again because ritual protects nothing but gives the body something to do on the way. And the body likes that. The sky had folded itself in. The light was not blue, not grey, but that color the air takes when it would like to make lightning later. The trucks at the cannery were gone. A dog howled down the hill and then was quiet. Sable Ridge has two traffic lights. One flashed red at the main intersection when the power dipped. The other stayed green all afternoon, even as the few cars that came rolled to a stop and then went because they knew better. The constant green gave me a feeling of being allowed and warned at the same time. I turned under it and the rain began. By the time I reached the reserve turnoff, the advisory ribbon hung wet, and the notice below had run, and the words had made themselves soft. The road did not want me to use it, and I did anyway because that is what roads are for. The puddles took on their own qualities. One mirrored tree after tree, and one seemed to depict only sky, even when you leaned over it and put your face there. I parked by the booster. The world narrowed. The sound became simple. Rain, leaves, and my breathing. The panel inside the station blinked as if it had been commanded by something nervous far away. I shut the valve to starve the spur. The wheel made the small squeal of metal, then settled into a low sigh. I used the wrench to tighten the cap and stood with my hand on the pipe to feel the line. There is a way you can tell the difference between water moving and the last of it settling. The pipe appeared to breathe. I moved my hand and wiped it on my jacket as if that would get the sensation off. Outside, the trees were not quite moving. That is worse than moving. Moving means friction, and friction means heat, and heat means you live. The not moving made the rain seem personal. It fell into the small space and gathered quickly, and then did not gather as quickly, as if the ground had decided to accept more than it had a right to. An animal moved in the brush and showed nothing of itself, because animals know how to be an idea. The rain on my hood was a steady drum. The whisper came from the ground at my left. I should have gone. I should write now that I turned, that I saw the board, that I thought of bones and prisons and men who go into a forest and do not come out because they want to tell their mothers something. I stayed. The whisper made a question shape again, and this time there was a syllable my mind leapt at and caught, and then my mind regretted catching it, because to catch a thing is to hold it, and to hold it is to be responsible for what it does next. I crouched. The draft now carried a smell I cannot name, except to say that if you have handled books left in a shed for 50 years, you have caught the echo of it. It is a patient smell. It does not insist. It waits until you notice it and then sits with you. The board beneath the frame of root was wetter than it should have been because it had not yet been appointed to be wet. It moved easier under my hand. The seam opened, and the dark below was not absolute. It was the dark of an inside place, an underside of a floor, the cavity between your walls where the wires come and go like glowing insects. A sound rose. It was like the breath a sleeping person takes when they do not know you are there. I did not remove the board. I did not lift it as fully as I had before. I slid it an inch. I saw in that inch the pale, jointed thing lift. It did not grab or rush. It rose in a deliberate way like a hand in a class that has waited to be called on. It reached air and seemed to taste it with each joint. Then another pale arc came up behind it, smoother than bone would be, more the surface of a thing that grows under a bark. The whisper collected itself and made sound that was almost words, and not any language I knew, and yet my heart answered with an increase of speed, like a child who hears their name called in a crowded room. The trees around us held still a fraction too long. Then the movement began not at the top, where wind should act, but below and within, at the root level. The trunks tightened, if that is something your body can see. The roots made noises you do not hear on days with no storms, and yet they made them without strain. The board shifted in a little, and the ground around it sank in a circle, a simple, shallow collar. The pale, articulated thing, hand, root, tool, came to rest on the seam and held itself there without weight. The radio on my hip came alive. The speaker scratched and then cleared, and I heard Lenore's voice arrive from a place that loved her and hated itself. She said my name and then waited. I put my hand to the radio and did not press the talk button. She said it again. That softened me. I pressed and said here and let go. Storm's moving in, she said. Reeve wants you back. There was a pause. I knew she would not ask what I was doing. She is polite in that way, the good way where you're not asking leaves a person their dignity for a little while longer. On my way, I said. The pale thing flexed. The ground around the board lifted like a person's skin when they see a small heat begin and they want to get out of the way. I put my palm slowly on the board and pressed. The articulated top slid beneath with a delicacy that had as little to do with me as I could ask. The seam closed. The draft kept on. The whisper didn't stop. It altered and weakened, and then, like something that chooses to be obeyed, it turned off. I stood, not quickly, and counted the steps with my eyes. I do not remember walking them. I remember the truck door and my hand after. How it left a mark on the handle that did not dry until I reached the office. The room felt small. The compressors had gone to ground, stayed quiet in the way machines do when the storm is near. The fans were off. You could hear the breathing of the people in the room, though no one breathed hard. I did not notice that I had brought something with me, until Pax asked if I had tracked in mud, and I looked at the floor and saw that my boots had left not dirt, but a shade darker than the concrete like water or oil. Only when I touched it with my finger, it was dry. I rubbed my finger and the shade went into my skin and did not come out when I cleaned it in the sink with soap that promised pine and delivered only the ordinary chemical word that we think is pine because the bottle said so. The storm came that night and gave us heavy rain without lightning. The power went out at 8 and came back at 9 and went out and stayed out. The traffic lights were dead, and the one that loved green so much sat blank in the dark, its back a suggestion of color that my eye supplied. The bakery cooler below me switched off. In the sudden quiet, I put my hand to the wall and found that the wall had its own hum. The building was an animal. It has always been an animal. The fridge in my unit fought its fight as long as it could and then yielded. And in the silence that followed, there was a sound from the stairwell that had the shape of someone standing still and listening. In that quiet I heard it, thin as a hair laid on a table. The zipper sound. It did not come from below or above. It came from the place where my apartment met the next building's wall, a thin gap where wires ran and air did not know it had a direction. It traveled to my ear, like someone telling a secret she did not intend for me to hear. I put my hand on the line of paint that covered the seam. It went on. It had the little catches a person makes when he thinks he might be heard. I slept in fits. I woke at 2, at 3, at the hour before dawn, when every mistake you made puts on boots and walks the length of your bed. The storm had blown through. The air now lay quiet. The fridge clicked and made a sound like a machine that would like to begin again and has not been given permission. It is hard to ask your sleep for clauses. I closed my eyes and saw the pale articulations that had risen, not grabbing, not attacking, only presenting themselves so I could help name them. When morning came, my body was moved like furniture that a person tired of a room does not know what to do with. I shaved and nicked my right cheek because the light caught the mirror weird and showed me my face as if my nose was shifted and my mouth had been pulled a fraction to the left. I pressed tissue to the cut and it became red and then brown, and the tissue kept the shape of my cut when I threw it away. Work did not invite us. Electricity did not invite itself. Reeve called from his truck because his was the only battery that wanted to get the message through, and said we'd work phones and radios if we could. He said we'd check the generator at the station. He said our people needed water no matter what the county thought about their closures and advisories. He did not say my name. That was kindness too. I suited up. I drank a glass of water from the tap, and the water was warm, and the warmth made me feel like a junkie for a thing I could not name. The flavor had shifted. It was none. That was worse than before. I licked my teeth and felt a smoothness I do not love feeling. My mug had a ring from last night's glass. I put today's under it, and the dark circle darkened, the ring an echo of an echo. I left the receipt under my glass, and the receipt curled like a leaf on a windowsill in a house no one sweeps. The station generator took a while. We rolled it out with both arms, and gas gave its stink from the can like an old promise. Hattie pulled and yanked, and then let the pull cord go, and the engine refused to say yes, and when it finally did, the yes was grudging. The panel lights smiled as if they were children who had gotten away with something. The sound felt a little better. There is a musician-esque trick to sound. A steady tone can calm a wall of nerves. The generator gave it sloppily. Our ears made it better than it was. Between generator checks, I took a walk around the yard the way you do when there is nothing else sensible to do. The drain by the fence took rainwater that had not yet decided to belong to the creek. The chain link dividing us from the reserve wore drops in each diamond, and each had its magnifications. Through one, I saw the trees beyond lay differently than they had yesterday, as if someone had rotated the picture by a handful of degrees. I blinked, and the view was normal, and then I refused to look a second time. We were not supposed to go out. The roads were trees, and trees were down, and the county radio told us all to stay. Still, when the line pressure sagged badly around the east spur on the printout, Lenore coaxed from the little printer by letting it breathe on her screen for a while before she pressed. Reeve looked at me and then looked away. He did not ask. He moved the schedule board without purpose, so he had something to hold in his hands. Hattie bit the inside of her cheek and did not tell me to be careful, because she is not a liar. Pax rattled a drawer and then closed it, and then opened it, and then, without knowing he was doing it, set a bottle top down and set it exactly in the ring it had made yesterday, and looked surprised when it fit. I took the truck that was least stubborn. The wind had left small branches everywhere, pieces you could pick up and put in the bed and think you had done your town some service. I did that until there were too many to do it for real. At the reserve road I drove slow. The advisory ribbon had torn and hung like a split lip. The gate had been dragged aside by someone in a hurry. Tire tracks went in and did not come out. That is how it is with some things. When I killed the engine by the booster, I let the quiet sit. The forest smelled like clean-cut wood, and like far places in a house where you do not go anymore, and like a memory you do not want to name, in case naming it brings you some draft that tells you something that will force you to act. I unhooked the radio and clicked it. The rain static was always there, even when the sky was clear. I leaned against the truck door and put my head back, and in that posture heard, as if under the ground's breath, a voice I remembered from no place I should remember. The tremble on my mother's exhale when she thought she had lost me in the hardware store and then saw me among the rakes. The sound of someone calling my name without moving her mouth. I walked to the root frame. The ground around it had sunk another half-inch. The board lay canted, as if the breath below had pushed and then restrained itself in a form of politeness. The wood had not rotted. It looked as if some force under it had answered each cell and asked it to live a little longer until it was asked to live no more. I crouched the way a person kneels at a pew he never goes to. My hands hovered. I wanted the board to move by itself so I could be the astonished person and not the guilty one. It did not. I believe that if I had walked away, then I could have lived and died an ordinary man. Yet I think sometimes that the world does not allow ordinary men to persist without paying a small tax. The tax is a decision you should not make, and you do anyway. I put my palms on the edges and lifted a fraction. The seam opened. The whisper came louder. The syllables, not words, not prayer, not threat. Something below was not asking for air, but inviting what air was not. A coolness came, not a draft now, but the temperature you feel when you stand in front of a freezer and it says, "In here is the winter you leave when you open the door." I slid the board farther than before. The hole was the size of my chest. The air made a sound like the inside of a shell pressed to your ear, years after that ear has forgotten the beach. I leaned and looked. A void. A rough cavity. A pit? No. It had edges too neat for that. Boards lined it, and the boards had been planed by someone who sharpened a plane on a stone by a creek. In the seam, a locking tongue had been set long ago. My mind made the name grave because there is not a better one to give. The articulated pale thing lifted and made a small, incautious reach toward the light. There were 5 of them in a line below, like ribs, or like the backs of small animals when they breathe in unison. The front one did not move farther. It turned, if a thing without a wrist can turn, and presented the back of its curve where I could see a groove, a place worn by pressure. My chest tightened. I had the unwholesome thought that this is the part that bled. I could say it was a hand. I could say the word now for you, the word you are waiting to see me confide. And then the story would resolve itself into the kind you think you already read as a teenager when your cousin left a box of paperbacks in your grandmother's closet and your eyes ate all the pictures on the covers before you dared to read the words. It was not a human hand. It was the idea of a hand plus something that does not belong to us. Each joint shone faintly, chased with a film like fungus makes when you lift the lid on a pail that had vinegar in it once. The thing lay near and did not strike with possession. The sense I had was not I am hunted, but I am noticed for a specific purpose. Like a man in a civil office who sees the clerk look up and nod, not because you are a person, but because your number has come. "I should go," I said aloud, though I had promised myself minimal speech. The sound of my voice in that place embarrassed me. It stayed around my head like a gnat swarm. I closed the board. I stood, and the board rose with me for a fraction, and then obeyed what was below and sat. A branch creaked and did not move. Far away, a truck honked once, an unhappy single note. I put my hand down on the board as if to apologize, and the board was warm. That was the detail that undid me. Warmth is the life sign. We check it as infants, and then we keep checking it in people until the day the person doesn't to make any. The board was as warm as a wrist. I put both palms down and pressed lightly and felt the warmth spread to the edges. I whispered, not a word anyone could hear, and the sound of it ran down into the seam and came back up, like the way your voice rides on elevator cable in your head when you stand very still. I went back to the truck. I stood with the door open and did not get in. The air had the rain after smell and something else. The whisper behind me changed. For the first time it had a shape that did not sound like breath. It sounded like the friction of paper when someone opens an old book at a section they know and does not yet read. I turned. The frame of the root did not hold the board now. The board had slid as if persuaded. It tilted into the hole and then stopped and stood at an angle like a lid someone set wrong. The pale articulated arcs rose again, and this time, for the first time, they came higher into the light and made the shape a person in another room would know as a hand held up because a person wants to ask for something and will not begin to speak until called on. A thought came clear into my head. It had no language attached. It was the idea, help. Every ghost story you have ever heard prepares you badly for being asked for help by a thing that may not be a ghost. I am not a person who refuses easily. I do not say this to make you think well of me. I say it because the habit has deformed my life, and because it can be an ill-fitting kindness to accept everyone else's request. I stepped forward. I crouched again. Rain dripped from the tree that did not move. I put my fingers under the edge of the board to lift it a little to see better what was down there, in case something down there needed lifting. The earth around my feet shifted. Not a lot, not dramatically, not the way a movie decides to move earth, ridiculous and sudden and violent so you feel life being taken by speed. No. It took me very slightly by the ankles. The soil on either side rose like the lightest touch of a lover who doesn't want to disturb. My left foot lost purchase. The ground under my right heel gave not in but forward, as if a small conveyor waited there and decided to show me how it could move me without my permission. The board slid farther over the opening toward the far edge, and the pale arcs moved inward as if making space for something. And that was when the warmth against my palms turned to a coolness, like outside air forgotten for 100 years. And in that coolness, there was a wet so fine that I would have called it the breath of the grave if I had been a person given to melodrama. I did not fall. I put my hand on the board and leaned into the oddness of the movement so that my center of gravity went to a place my legs had not been told to go. That gave my mind a chance to get ahead of my body, and my mind said, "You are in danger," and for once, my body agreed. I stepped back. The lip of the hole collapse was quiet. The seam closed a fraction. In the dark below, there was a soft sound like someone in wet clothes trying to draw them over their shoulders without making noise. The hand shape withdrew. It did not vanish. It went back to that level where you see the edge of a thing, and maybe the thing is only a coil of the root, if you were the kind of child who could talk himself out of the closet. Truth. I backed to the truck door with my hands out. I did not look away. My boots made sucking sounds, quiet, as if the ground appreciated the courtesy of my moving slowly. I stepped up and into the cab and closed the door. The door had a thin rubber seal, and it made the sound it always makes when water is in that seam. The breath left me. I turned the key. The truck started, and the idling gave me a friend. Driving out, I kept my hands on the top of the wheel the way my father did when he was listening to the road speak. You don't want to twist your grip when you're sure of nothing? That's what he would say if he were here. The advisory ribbon fluttered a little where it was torn, and I had the thought of a patient with a bandage and the old cut beneath. The office had light from a generator, and we sat it out while the lines came back and the water moved among the pipes again with the pressure we paid to force it. We did not talk about the closure. The county sent a note up the chain that used the carved phrases that say nothing in case they reprinted later. Thornroot Reserve will reopen a loop on the west, it said. The east remained under assessment. Reeve put the note on the board, and this time did not tape it, because tape expects words to stay still. I did not feel ill. I have to say that because it would be easier if I could tell you I became dizzy, or my skin changed, or I coughed up something with a life of its own. None of that. I was very hungry, and then not hungry at all. My mouth was dry, and then too wet, as if I had been chewing mint. When I lifted my mug and drank, the water in the mug moved a fraction, as if something had brushed it. Then it settled. Sleep did not visit. I heard everything. The bakery cooler restarted like a man remembered his wife's birthday just in time. The stair light clicked. A car failed to start and then started and left, called by some obligation that believed in itself too much. I had the sense of being looked at by something whose looking was not cruel, but very old. I wanted to be under a bed, as I had as a child. I wanted to be small enough to make my back against a wall and know nothing could get all the way around to my face. I went back the next morning. I told no one. The world had that overwashed look that comes after a storm and makes you feel like you woke up in a room where someone cleaned and threw away your comfortable dirt. The ground was wet, but the top layer had cracked like a crust, and the cracks made letters my mind wanted to read, if it had been a mind that could read cracked earth. I parked and left the door open like a person who won't be long. The frame of the root had sagged another inch. The board lay flush again, as if someone had closed it. That offended me for a ridiculous reason. I wanted my board, my seam, my fractions. The draft still came, and this time there was a new smell in it. Flowers, not good flowers. The smell of lilies left in a small room, the kind of smell that convinces you the dead love it. The whisper waited a second after I crouched. It was as if the sound inside had to find a way through a maze of boards, of abutments, of things. When it came, I knew it was not my name, and it was not a word like help, and it was not a groan. It was a series of sounds that made a pattern. I put my head a little closer and moved my ear. I had the strange sense that I was hearing a record played backward in a house where no one owns a record player. I slid the board. The pale arcs lifted, one then the next, a choreography. Below them, the shape they had been attending came into light. A skull, yes, I will not sugar this. But I say skull not to give you the comfort a skull gives a person who reads. You picture a human skull like the one in the diagram, the two holes, the teeth. This was not that. It was a skull, as imagined by a thing that had not been invited to the great conference on skulls. It had the sense of sockets, and it had a ridge that said nasal, even if there had never been a nose, and whatever jaw there had ever been had become a thin, handle-like arc. The thing had been there long enough. The color of it was the color of the board above, only smoother, as if it was the board's original plan. It lay there in the light and did not mind. Words had been carved or burned into the broadest part of the board, near the seam. I had not seen them before because they had been faint and the damp had brought them up. Letters. I could not read them at first because they were also being made again in the damp, swelling the places where the tool had made the cuts, as if the wood wanted to push them up like a rash now that someone had put pressure on them again. The letters said a name, and the name did not belong in our town. It had too many consonants together, and then a vowel that opened like a yawn. Below the name was a date. The first part of the date had been burned away or eaten by some staining liquid. What I could read was the last digit of the year, a 9. The grave was old enough to predate the town's maps. It was not official. No man with a license had made it, unless he had lost the license before they nailed the board down. The handwriting of the carving was not a carpenter's. It was a child's, or a hand shaking, or the hand of someone who was making letters he had seen and not used before. The articulated pale arcs gathered in toward the skull, as if listening nearer. The whisper rose to meet my ear, as if something had gained a new energy, because someone had said aloud a name that had not been spoken in the air in a long time. I grabbed the board. I slid it hard and covered the hole, and the whisper cut off like a switch. And then in the seam, something else rose and stopped there. A filigree like mycelium, only not soft, and knitting like cicada shells, only not dry, a lacing of pale devices that had grown together without the courtesy of asking each other what sort of creature they were making. It reached the bottom of the board and rested there and seemed to think. I did not wait to see what it would do when it had the idea. I stood. I ran. I ran the way old men run when they are trying not to fall. I ran like a person who is embarrassed and wants to be far away from the embarrassment. And then I found the truck, and I got inside, and I locked the door without laughing at myself. I drove too fast, and then slowly, and then too fast again. Every tree became a person who wanted to know where I had been. Back at the office, I took the scanner gun in my hand and pointed it at the ailing barcode above the door as if it would confess. The gun chirped. The readout blinked nonsense and then held still and wrote my name on the screen. That is not what scanner guns do. They tell you that you found a meter. They do not write your name as if they were glad. I put the gun back in its cradle too carefully, as if something in it would break if I let it feel how I felt. I wrote on a form another note about a brace and about an unauthorized burial that would require county consultation, and about soil destabilization and hazard, and I wrote a little more fiercely than necessary, and I placed the paper beneath Reeve S. other papers and put a mug down on it. The ring formed over the sentence that mentioned the board, as if the water wanted to underline a part I did not want underlined. I moved the mug, and the ring sat there like a mouth. That afternoon, the wind returned for a short while. It moved the world in the proper order again, top to bottom, and we took heart without admitting we were taking it. The power stopped dying. The generators stood down, and the refrigerator line at the district made a good steady noise, as if they had had a rest and were ready to serve us again. We recalced the chlorine feed. Pax wrote a figure on a slip, and the numbers looked confident. Hattie washed her hands and wiped them on the towel, and it stayed soft where it had dried stiff before. Toward the evening, out of habit more than a belief that belief would save me, I walked out into the yard while the rain gave our chain-link fence little beads in the corners of each diamond. The drain zipped. I listened to its zipper and found that the sound from the seam I had made in the reserve made the same shape in my ear. I looked up at the reserve. The trees there held themselves as if they included a house I could not see. That night, the cooler below made a new noise. Hidden things do that when you are near to not being able to stand it. The new noise was a small cluck, water somewhere within a cycle that was not finished. The light under the stair switch winked, and then stayed on, and then turned red, and then green. And I thought of the traffic light that had loved green and wanted to never move again. I poured water at the sink, and this time the water smelled fine. The taste was fine. In that ordinary was a wrongness. It's like when you expect the winter air to sting, and it does not, and you do not know what to do with your face. I slept without dreaming because I did not sleep at all. I kept my eyes on the wall until the wall had the quality of an inside of a jar, and the small imperfections in the paint seemed like words that would become a letter if I turned the lamp on. I refused to turn the lamp on. The hall timer clicked 2 times without beginning, and I heard a footstep that was a floorboard deciding to be a footstep, and then it was only wood again. Dawn came. The light had a watercolor quality. I stood, and my legs were tired as if I had been used. On the final day of this, the county lifted the closure in a way that meant nothing really had changed. They adjusted the red hatching on the map on the internet and sent an advisory in language that made the world the same for anyone reading it, no matter what town they were in. Thornroot Reserve Eastern Loop, under partial reopening observational status. I thought of eyes half behind shutters. I thought of being watched through a keyhole in a door I had never seen from the other side. Reeve said my name then, 3 times. He had found both of my notes. He put them on the table side by side like 2 planks laid across a hole in a floor. He did not read them aloud. He looked at my face the way men look at their sons when they believe they must say something forbidding and then realize the boy has already done the thing. "We report it," he said. His voice was more quiet than usual. The sounds of the office held him up, the fans and the fridge and the hose whistle now repaired into a lower, steadier tone that could have been called a hum and not a whistle. He was telling me we would bring in authorities. He was also telling me that nothing good ever came from being first with this sort of news. He rubbed the corner of one note until the paper peeled. "Don't go back today," he said. "It was not an order." I did not say I understood. I do not say that when a person tells me things that do not rely on understanding. I nodded, collected the sample bottles from the lab, and loaded the truck. I took the good flashlight. At the door, I turned and put the mug to the left of the sink instead of to the right to see if anyone else noticed. No one noticed. I had the east spur to check for residual after the line had settled. It was my pretext. I did not drive to the booster. I parked at the chain-link gate at our yard and climbed the fence in the way we all sometimes did when we were too tired to pretend to care about small rules. The reserve on that side is a slope with a shallow ditch, and then the first trees take you, and you look back and it is sky you see and not the yard you left, and that is not because of the trees, but because of the way you are about where you put your head. I walked in under that first layer and saw the small trail the raccoons take and took it. It veered toward where the road would be, and away again, as if a person with an odd hand had laid a string, and then pulled it lightly until it made a wavering line. The whisper found me before I wanted it to. It had lost its question shape. It was more confident. I felt idiotic for thinking that, and then tried to think of something else and could not. The ground gave in a little at my left foot, and then again, and I stood where both my soles felt a firm skin. If you spend years walking around valves and small falls and forgotten culverts, you become agile at avoiding the places where the ground pretends to be ground. I am agile that way. I was not agile enough. When the board slid, it made the agreeably ordinary sound of wood not bearing weight. This was the trick of it. There was nothing dramatic. The ground tilted a degree, and I went with it, and my right knee said an old curse my father would have said, only he never swore, so the sound in my knee was not a word and was an ache. The seam opened and the air came up and the smell lifted, and for a second I believed I had returned to an earlier time in a house I never lived in. That is how smell works. It cannot help the evocations it chooses. The pale arcs rose as if expecting me. The skull lay where it lay. The wiring of fungi, or something we would call that because we do not have the other word, ran up the inside walls like lace. The articulation presented its back to me, and the groove where a thing goes on it, except the thing that goes on it is not a ring and not a rope and not a person's hand. The whisper became a voice I would not hesitate to name if I had not promised myself that I would keep my cheap promises. It asked without asking. I did not touch it. I did not give it the smallest gift. I stood with my hands at my sides, and my mouth decided to make a sound my ears did not deserve. I said a name the board had shown me with the water ring on the letters and the piece that had been burned away. Whatever name came out of my mouth did not belong to anyone in town or any book in the library, and yet it had a dignity the way sounds sometimes do when they are old enough. When I said that name, the forest around us moved properly at last in top-to-bottom wind, for a brief breath, as if something had let go of the treetops. The arcs above the seam lifted higher, and the board shifted again and became vertical, sitting against the root frame like a door, leaned against a wall to dry after you hauled it out of a flooded basement. In the same movement, my ankle found a place that was not a place, and my body went forward, and my left hand reached and caught the board edge, and my right hand went into the hole to brace on the inner side and brushed something that wanted it. Do not fear that I will describe it as if I were making something up. I did not feel damp hair or cold fingers or any fiction's sign. I felt a surface that was neither hard nor soft, neither alive nor dead. It was the surface of a thing that has its own way of waiting. It did not clutch. My palm made it contact because contact had to be made. The whisper stopped. Stopped as in ceased to exist, not as in paused to see what I would do next. The arcs froze at the angle of attention. The board at my left bent under my grip and then held. Something deep below knocked once, politely. It was the sort of knock your neighbor makes when they want to borrow a tool and they do not wish to frighten you. The sound of it traveled into my arm and up and settled on my shoulder as if it belonged there. I saw then, because something in me still kept the habit of seeing roads in maps, that the roots around the opening had grown toward the grave and then away from it, as if trying for years to push it closed again, and then trying to hold it open so someone would know. The forest had worked as a community without deciding to. This had been a prison. There was no other word. But a prison for a thing that had not been held in a way anyone had ever been trained to build a hold for. It was a kept place. It was the kept part of the kept place that had needed a hand. I eased my hand back, and the contact broke with no sound. The arcs lowered a fraction as if content with my refusal. There was gratitude in that lowering as surely as there was calculation. I do not know which reflex of the mind allowed me to stand up as if I had only tied a boot and not participated in a thing that will never leave me until the soil of me is as good aboard as any man could wish. I did not run. I walked, and the trees let me go. The light shifted, and I could see the road, and then the chain link, and then the drain with its zipper song, and the hose we had fixed, and the bay concrete, and the office with the lights on, and then the fridge with its kind and faithful hum. I walked into Hattie and apologized, and she put her palm on my shoulder where the knock had settled, and the heat from her hand took that pressure a half-inch away from my bone, and I almost cried for that mercy. Reeve asked me no questions. I filed no further note. The county never came because we did not tell them. The closure receded into neat lines on an online map. The boosters did their work, and the generator sits in the corner now with a drop of old gas on its housing that has shaped itself into a gleaming marble and will not run down. The scanner gun beeps when we ask it, and the little printer prints receipts that do not curl as long as the weather behaves. At night, I put the mug over the place on my table where the ring had been. The ring still shows in the light that comes from the TV when the show is too blue. I put my wrist to it sometimes and then remove it. The fridge breath keeps its line, the bakery cooler does not cluck, the stair light holds steady, the traffic light loves all its colors narratively again. I go to the reserve sometimes when the busier parts of me want to make it so none of this ever happened. I do not go to the culvert. I stand by the chain link and put my fingers through the diamonds and feel the air on the children of my knuckles. The drain zips water to places that will empty themselves further down. The trees keep their interior speech and give me none of it. I think of how many graves are only boards with names carved badly into them. I think of hands that rise because hands do rise. I think of prisons that are meant to keep a thing like that for us and fail because everything fails and then sweeps itself up and makes a new failure into a door. Sable Ridge goes on. The cannery counts its forklifts backward. The packaging plant unloads rolls of film at dawn that unspool with a sound like the breath inside a shirt. Lenore draws her maps and lays them flat and then tucks them into a drawer as if tucking in a child's feet. Pax tests chlorine and finds comfort in a particular yellow. Hattie lifts what is too heavy and sets it down with a mercy that took her a lifetime to learn in all the rooms where such things are learned. Reeve writes notes longer than they have to be and scratches out the parts he decides don't belong because he knows they do, and he wants to allot himself a little pride in restraint. There is a place in the reserve where a board floats in soil less like soil than air, and a skull that was not made by a man lies not at peace, but not as your storybooks would have it either. The arcs wait and will always wait. I know I am not the first to slide that board. I know I am not the last. The prison holds because someone has always found it and put their dumb human hands against it and felt the warmth that is not warmth and the cool that is not cool and decided to be kind enough and foolish enough to close it again. At night, very late when the bakery fans are off for their maintenance and my fridge empties its warm into my warm and the stair tick is not notched on its timer. The zipper sound rides the seam in my wall. It is not a call. It is not a warning. It is a small act of presence. The ring on my table holds its shape for my wrist. The towel will dry stiff in the morning. The scanners will chirp. For me, for whoever comes next. If I lie very still, I can smell the faintest trace of lilies under the ordinary smells of my kitchen. And for one long breath, the air becomes heavy the way a room goes heavy when a wake has gone into the yard and left the chairs with coats on them. I close my eyes and see nothing, and that is my good fortune. I keep my palms flat on the bedspread. I tell myself, you did not touch what wanted you to. I tell myself, you did not run. I tell myself, you will not go back again. I also know I am a liar. When the wind has lain 2 nights low and the county has not moved their red hatchings for weeks, I will go. I will break my small promise. I will climb the fence and stand beside the drain with its zipper voice. I will walk to the frame under the birch and set my hands down on the board and wait and determine with a man's error that I have the strength this time to choose better. I will lift. I will see whatever waits, and perhaps the forest will shift into shapes it has been practicing. Perhaps the arcs will rise and complete for me what they began for someone with the carved name. Perhaps the board, at last, will take my hands fully as it warms and cools, and in that moment I will be the necessary weight that keeps the prison's door from opening any further. Perhaps I am already that weight. Perhaps the thing that was kept learned my name from the sound water makes in pipes and has it now like a bead that will not be dropped. If there is to be a next, he will stumble on the grave and hear the whisper and put his thumb to the crisp of soil, and the hollow below will answer him the way hollows answer fools and men with jobs alike. He will see the shape in the trees that is a rib cage, if you let your eyes take that angle, and the hand will rise to ask for help, and he will tell himself that he is good, or he will tell himself that he does not care, and he will do as I did. I am not unique. I am a man who carries a mug and listens for the sound of compressors and ties down lids before storms. I am a man who writes his initials in the box and believes that makes a thing true. I am that weight for a while. I will not live forever. This is what I think of this, my going and my failed promise, my habit of help. The forest will have me in whatever way it was designed to have me, and if I leave a ring beneath a mug for one more man to notice in a room, with a fridge hum and a towel stiff on its hook, that is the sum of what I will have done. The grave asks a favor and men answer. The roots twist and hold the board in their cradle for a time, and then someone slides it back into place like the lid of a box in a house whose doors you can open only once. By midday, the light in Thornroot Reserve has a certain quality, a green heavier than summer, a green that tells you in confidence that it was here first and will be here when the red hatchings are long forgotten and the people who write the advisories have become the faintest kind of silence. That is the hour when the drain by our fence speaks loudest. That is when the zipper carries through the chain link and says my name without needing to know it, and I, in the back bay, turn the hose off, and the whistle stops, and the silence of the district breathes evenly, and together we listen for the sound of the board moving a fraction, and we do not speak of it. We will speak of it to no one. We cannot. We are people with jobs. We are all the next to be forgotten. That is the truth the whisper tells most clearly, if you give it your ear and not your hands. It says you belong here for a time. It says put this back as you found it. It says I will be waiting. If this story lands with you, please like the video, subscribe, and share it with someone who enjoys quiet literary horror. Comments are open. Tell me your favorite image or line.